push the recording button. This is a public and recorded meeting of the Kubernetes community, and today is Thursday, March 24th. Our agenda is relatively light. We had a cancellation in demos this morning, so I'm going to take the opportunity to talk for a moment about whether or not the demo space is meeting people's needs, and so we'll do that in a minute. We have TJ Galterman, as soon as I see him join, talking through the proposed 1.3 milestone timelines. Last week, we had a bunch of different special interest groups report out about the work that was going to happen in 1.3, and everybody had a lot to digest, so I want to draw out comments, see if people want to talk a little bit about that, and then we have a couple of special interest group reports. If we have time and it's interesting, we can, I saw a bunch of new faces on here, so we can do a couple of introductions if people are interested, but we'll see how the timing goes. So let me start with demos, because what I use the demo time for is to allow other people, when people who are late and just trying to get into a meeting room, to come in and see what's going on, give us a little bit of a buffer before we get to what I would call the meat of the community conversations. Is there something else that people want from those demos specifically? I am happy to go in search of specific demos or broadly topically demos, or tell me that I'm allowing too many people in with too vendor-y focus. Give me feedback on the demos time slot. It's perfect.
I actually like them. Okay. But I would say that the cluster ops team actually has demos and deployment discussions as part of our mission. And so if you want to offload some of the production-y, the ops side of it to us, I'm happy to have us, because that we actually budget 30 minutes for real ops discussions, and demos can be part of that. As long as people are willing to talk about ops as part of the demo.
Right. What works, what doesn't. Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, I'll echo that real quick and say that whether they're specifically pushing an agenda or not, I enjoy the demos. It's just good exposure.
Okay, cool.
I echo that sentiment as well. I think that the demos are very informative for those of us who are really heads down on particular features, just to get a chance what other people in the community are doing, how other people perceive Kubernetes, and what vendors are doing with Kubernetes. It's all super fascinating.
Good. Okay. Well, then so far I will consider this, unless anybody's going to go in the other side of this argument, that what we've been picking for demos and what people have been offering us as demos fits the needs of the community and, like I said, my 10-minute padding need.
I think as long as you keep them short. Yep.
Yeah, I am actually actively back-channel. This is why I look for people to take notes. Speaking of which, we need someone to be taking notes. This is why I ask people to take notes for me, is because I am generally actively back-channeling with people going, okay, so 2 more minutes, let's go. So that's very helpful. Do I have a volunteer to take notes? Thank you, Rob. Okay. And Lee, thank you for taking notes last week. All right, and there was Jason was helping you as well, right?
It was, yeah. Ryan J was.
Oh, Ryan J. Sorry, I had the J first, not the R. Perfect. Okay, is TJ on the line? Maybe. I don't see TJ. Okay, speaking of active back channelings, I will go ping him and see if he's going to join us. Okay, but we can jump on to our next agenda item, which is we saw a bunch of the different special interest group and Red Hat feature commits or feature discussions last week. It was a really rapid fire conversation, and all of the links that I've been able to get are in last week's notes in our note document. Is there anything specific from that anyone wants to discuss? Everybody said, hey, we want a little bit of time to digest. You've all digested? No.
In my mind, I think the interesting thing here is not the list of what people want to do, but as a project, how are we going to prioritize? Because there's going to be stuff that's going to require, external work for people to review and sort of bring stuff on board. And so, I feel like we're in this phase of like, let's do all the everythings, right? And there's going to be a certain amount of prioritization that needs to happen, and that's where the hard decisions come.
Okay. And I know you and I, Joe, have had some conversations about what that might look like, and we're pulling together more conversations and proposals and such on that. So defining things that look like a path that is more clear for features, how to get a feature reviewed, how to get a feature accepted, committed, get all of this information in. So that is, I hope, coming next week. For a longer conversation on that. We'll be sharing the draft discussion individually this week, I think, because it's all being framed very much still as early. Nobody's committed to any new process, but we're trying to get feedback from individuals initially, and then hopefully next week we'll bring it to the broader community.
I'm assuming that part of that is a no process.
It has to include a process.
Okay, good.
In fact, that is one of the sticking points. Is there was not an explicit no process, but there does need to be a no process.
Thank you.
It's not about saying no; it's about prioritization.
Yeah. It's about saying not now.
It's not now. Saying no doesn't mean no; it just means not now.
Exactly.
Well, my concern is people backdoor it and say, they said no to me, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's been, and it's a community, so you don't want to. You have to. There's an avenue where that happens, and there's an avenue where you're like, you know what, we actually needed this. Wasn't our priority. Sorry.
Well, and there are two very different no's. Not now is one of them. This is not a priority, but there is also that is out of scope. That does not fit the vision. And that's a different problem and can potentially be a stickier one. But there is also then is there an edge or an extensibility point that can be built so you can do your thing elsewhere if you find that there is a customer base for it, a user base for it, that kind of thing. So there's it's like improv. Yes, and we'll build it as an extensibility point for you, but not right now.
Cool.
Okay, but yes, we're talking through different processes and suggestions about how we can make this more clear, because right now it is not as clear as it could be. Any other bits that people want to talk about on?
Yeah, I'll raise something real quick where it seems like ultimately the 1.2 roadmap ended up on the Kubernetes wiki last time.
Yes.
And the Kubernetes wiki is only available for edit to those people who have LGTM privileges or write privileges to the repo. Now, as somebody who's part of a SIG, I'd really like to contribute to the release notes, but I don't want to have edit rights to the entire repository. And so just broadly speaking, the state of the Kubernetes wiki seems to be something that was left out of the transition to the new document site.
Call it phase 2. We're working on it.
Could absolutely be phase 2. So I just wanted to mention that I raised an issue about that, and I CC Kubernetes docs team and you, Sarah.
Yep.
I wasn't sure who else I should CC to get the ball rolling on this, because I think we all agree that we want something that's a little more extensible, but maybe there are a couple different ways to accomplish this. And
exactly.
Suggestion as to what that might be.
And I have a to-do to write an update to your wiki ticket, which actually suggests that we break out the wiki into actual repos so that its own space in order to give each SIG its own control over whatever they want to put in this and not have to even go through a gating factor of docs. So that we don't have to give the broader LGTM privileges to people who either or especially don't want it or shouldn't have it.
Totally agree. But just to sort of go back to the 1.3 release notes, do we think that those are going to end up in this new place? And what do we think the process might be to sort of update that roadmap as we sort of realize what scope's looking like? Or Or is maybe this the time where we look at actually using the milestones a little bit sooner?
I would vote using milestones sooner, but I'm going to have, Brian's jumping into the frame. I see this.
Yeah, our plan is to use the milestone. And the fundamental problem we had with an actual roadmap doc checked into the repo is that it was always willfully out of date. Also with our old doc process, we had the additional problem that it was very out of date copies of it were made and were then in future to update forever, basically. So the content that's in the wiki, definitely needs to be thought in general. The original idea of the wiki was to put content there that needed to be updated quickly without really a review process. So like frequently asked questions so that people could post the information while they were answering questions on IRC and have the people see it right away, or links to community sites explaining how to write, a Ruby client library or whatever it was. Just again, a lightweight way to post information like right there on the spot. It's sort of, with the explosion of SIGs in particular, that content is really difficult for the SIG maintainers to keep up to date being on the wiki. So one option definitely would be to move it off the wiki. Definitely in general, we're discussing separate repos for the SIGs so they can use wikis or put whatever content they want there. As far as the roadmap in particular, I'm not a big fan of docs. It seems to be impossible to keep them up to date. So we are going to try to aggressively use the milestone and keep the milestone up to date this time.
Okay, that makes total sense. I guess my concern on using the milestones, which I'm hugely in favor of, is I think that adding labels to issues in the Kubernetes repo also requires the same level of access as editing the wiki. And so I'm concerned that if we're going to use labels as the way of triaging what each SIG is interested in, we still need to find some way to give SIG owners the ability to edit that. I think there had been some talk last time, for example, of allowing people to comment on an issue and then having some bot recognize that they were part of a known good users list, and the bot would then add the label, as opposed to giving people the ability to add labels themselves.
Yes. And in general, I'm in favor of that. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to work around GitHub's lame auth mechanism, but definitely feel free. There are a number of issues filed against GitHub and various GitHub repos that you can +1 on now that they have finally implemented the +1 feature. But in lieu of that, I am in favor of using bots to do this. If you want to, we have our bot machinery is in contrib. If you want to submit a PR to do something like this, we would definitely entertain it.
Okay, super open to that. I mean, another option might be to break issues out into their own repo as well, and then you can have less restrictive write access to that particular repo.
As I was saying, in general, I'm in favor of creating separate repos for various purposes. We're creating more and more. I think one of the main gating factors is sorting out how dependencies would work between repos and getting all of our automation working, like automatic PR and issue assignment, CLA bots, all the different bots. But for now, if we just wanted to create repos for the SIGs and let them manage issues and wikis and whatnot, I would be totally fine with that. So yeah, if you want a repo, just let us know.
Okay, so I apologize for hijacking the meeting with this discussion, but I'm just trying to figure out what the right forum is to discuss these kinds of issues going forward. I sort of opened up a GitHub issue and CC'd some people, and there's been a lot of discussion internally, but I haven't seen that externally. So if Slack or the mailing list is a better forum to sort of hash this stuff out, I'm super in favor of taking it to the venue where we can talk about this.
This meeting is fine as a venue. I mean, in general, just realized for the past few weeks, we've been absolutely slammed by 1.2, 1.3 planning, Google Next, quarterly planning. It's just an avalanche of stuff. So I apologize for not being responsive, but literally we get notifications every 30 seconds, 24 hours a day. So sometimes it's hard to get the signal through the noise.
And this is, yes, I'll second Brian's point. This forum is about what you guys as the community need. It shouldn't be all about reporting out. So this is a perfect space to say, first, I raised an issue. Is that the right place? And yes, I think that's the right place. And B, you guys didn't, I didn't get the follow-up I expected, wanted, hoped for. Let's talk more about it. So thank you. And I am the gate on that because I said I took the action item that I would update the issue and I haven't yet.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right. Anything else we want to talk about this, about 1.3, the reporting out from last time, or do we want to jump onto the 1.3 timing? Because TJ is here. All right, let's do 1.3 timing.
Sounds good. I will try to share my screen and hope that this works.
Are you at next?
No, I'm in Seattle. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is on the Kubernetes wiki, just wiki release 1-3. And basically, I just laid out a strawman schedule for 1.3. And the assumption is it should look a lot like 1.2 with some tweaks. This is not re-envisioning anything crazy. So first off, and I also sent out an email yesterday, the day before, to Kubernetes dev. And so most people should have this in their inboxes buried somewhere. If we look at 1.2, the sort of gist of it, and this is not how we planned it, this is how it kind of actually happened, because I think that's probably more valuable. We did about 8 weeks of coding and then declared feature complete. 2 weeks of bug fixes and testing, and then put head in a code while head was in a code slush. Another 2 weeks is bug fix and testing, and then declare a beta and actually branch. And then from beta branch to final was about another 2 weeks. So that's the gist of it. We didn't treat these as really hard dates, so it's not like we were unwilling to slip a date or move things around as needed. But that's what it looked like, and that's how we get to about a 3 to 3.5 month shift cycle. In the end, we ended up slipping by about a week and a half, which isn't terrible given a 14-week goal to land at 15.5. And so sort of thinking back on this and gathering feedback from a lot of sources, seemed like things that could help in 1.3 is be much more clear about what features are absolutely in and out from the beginning. And we've been working on that and been talking about 1.3 features more in these community meetings, and checking back on those as the milestone goes on. In some cases, we'd get 7 weeks in and we discover that something is well off. So we should check back on those sooner. Also, just in general, being more conservative with the release, the number of features in the release, and be willing to release, if a feature is not quite ready, tell ourselves, yes, it's okay for this to go in 1.4, like minimize the number of things we truly hold the release for. And then more tactically, feature coding seemed to take a little longer. We fooled ourselves a little bit with declaring that, and we're still letting some features finish up and slip out past that. It seems like we could probably add 1 more week to the feature coding part of it and remove 1 week from bug fixing. And I would say this is with a big caveat, as long as we stay on top of test flags. Because that was another thing that bit us and cost us probably a week or 2 of feature coding during 1.2.
Yeah, in general, I have a couple of things to say about that. One is if we can keep features better tested all along the way, that would certainly help a lot, rather than sort of waiting until the end to go write a bunch of tests and fix a bunch of tests. That uncovered problems very late. In some cases, some very severe problems. So definitely for folks that I know are vendoring in Kubernetes, the earlier you can update to an alpha release sometime during the cycle, that would expose problems earlier. Another thing we need to do is to get more mileage out of our beta releases. it was somewhat of a compressed schedule this time due to all the test flakes and feature complete slip. But in general, we didn't get as serious testing of the beta releases as I would have liked. Whereas, once we announced 1.2.0, within hours we got feedback that could have been exposed weeks before that if someone had just picked up the data. So we need to figure out how to incentivize people to actually kick the tires a little harder on the betas. And if we are going to slip features from one release to the next, definitely keep that in mind as you implement it, because we need incomplete features to not be confusing to users, right? So if a feature is not fully baked, it needs to be invisible, right? It needs to not appear in the API. It needs to not appear in documentation. It needs to not potentially cause problems in any of the components due to only partially existing. So if you implement a major feature that might actually slip over, consider ways in which you could disable it. For example, for most of the APIs, we disabled them by default when they were in so-called alpha stage in 1.1, and they didn't appear in documentation or in the API, and then we enabled them in the 1.2 timeframe. Right, so think about how you can do that if you're implementing a really big feature that's going to take weeks to.
Is that something we're standardizing?
It absolutely is.
Okay.
I would really
test. Yeah.
We're absolutely going to have a lot more rigor around this if we want to get to shorter release cycles. Right, the past 2 release cycles have each been about 4 months, even though our target has been 3 months. If we want to get to 3 months or 2 months or even 1 month, we're going to need a lot more rigor around this kind of a thing, and but definitely better tests for backward compatibility, upgrade testing, and the like as well. So we'll get there. It's just going to take time, and definitely, folks in the testing SIG or others in the community are thinking about this. Definitely open to proposals and to getting this stuff documented so we can raise the bar on best development practices for the project.
Just a quick comment on feature complete, Brian. Do we, and this is sort of partly a proposal and partly a question, does feature complete imply that you have a complete design document so that some reasonable person could go to some place and find out exactly how this thing that you're building is going to work, and then the code, and then the actual, at least one end-to-end test that tests the feature? One can always add more tests afterwards, but I think some non-zero coverage of your feature in end-to-end tests is a requirement before you can declare yourself to be feature complete within that 8-week deadline.
Not just non-zero coverage, but non-flaky coverage would be my proposal from testing.
Yeah, so that's great. We do need non-flaky coverage. One thing we discovered in 1.2 is you can write end-to-ends and be very convinced that they're great. But as soon as you actually submit it and turn it on, the fact that our test infrastructure is just running those tests all the time uncovers flakes quickly in those tests. So for features that sort of come down to the wire and they get committed on the feature complete date, it is possible or likely that those tests that you commit very close to that date then become flaky the week or two after.
Well, we may need a cut line that is significantly before the feature complete date, or maybe we need to pull the feature complete date back farther to avoid that.
We could introduce another.
So I mean, one option here is to make sure that new features are under some sort of flag for that release so that they can easily be turned off, or the default for actually exposing that feature late in the game. If we had that framework, then if we find that, okay, you're there for feature complete, but then the thing's just a bug farm or flaky or whatever, you can actually pull that out at, as you go down to the wire.
But to be clear, I think
more optimistic. Yeah.
I think it's quite reasonable, TJ, to, we've got this 8 weeks. Provided your feature gets in before that 8-week deadline and it has end-to-end tests associated with it, even if those are not 100% coverage, but your feature basically works, and you've run those repeatedly, and then they're submitted as part of your PR. As you say, if the flakes happen shortly after that, we just roll back everything. We just revert the thing that went in, and we say it's not it's not non-flaky enough to go into the repo yet, and you've got 2 to 4 weeks to fix that problem up, which seems reasonable.
Well, so one challenge there is that we need to make test resources available to people, because when the tests get run by the PR builder, they run hundreds of times more frequently than people running them on their own, right? And it's just hard for people to do that without, a lot of resources and infrastructure to do that for them. So, practically speaking, we can roll things back or turn things off, but then we immediately lose the coverage that we were getting that exposed those flakes in the first place, right? So what we saw was we would turn features on, they would cause flakes, we'd turn them off, fix those problems, turn it on, get more flakes, turn it off again, right? So eventually, like with deployment, we just left it on, and we just put concerted effort into pounding out all the flakes, and that actually allowed us to make faster progress. It was annoying, I understand, for like everybody else who had to kick their PRs. And then maybe there's some automation we could build that would make that better, like automatic patterns. Like for Borg, we have a pattern detector to catch warnings and errors and logs and things like that. And we automatically file bugs for new ones, but we have patterns saying ignore this one because we already investigated it and we know what it is and we fixed it, or it's not fixable, or whatever it is. So we could create some sort of framework like that that would say, we know what this is, automatically restart the tests and put in the issue number that it corresponds to. And then when someone fixes the test, they can go clean up that pattern. But we need to find a way that we don't lose the coverage that exposes the flakes, because if it's a like 1 in 500 flake, those are pretty hard to find on your own, especially if you're running in an isolated environment. A lot of times they don't get exposed ever, even if you run it 1,000 times in a row.
It sounds to me like what we're missing at the moment. If you commit a test that goes into the main repo, and that's the only way that you can get. No, actually, that's not true. It's the best way you can get your test to actually run. It then potentially blocks all other merges if it fails.
All right, hang on. You guys are talking a lot, and neither of you have attended SIG testing to talk about this stuff. We've talked about this at length in there.
Okay.
I think the goal here is we would really like to get to a point where all the tests are run all the time, but some subset of tests become blocking or gating for merges. And that really should be the definition of when a feature has fully landed and is part of a release. It's been stable enough and non-flaky enough over some subset of history that we can verify as a community publicly. And that's what will allow us to add a tag that says, okay, please block based on this. But I really think there's no reason we should not be running all the tests all the time to get data about how flaky they are before we start gating on them. Does that make sense?
So all new tests would start in sort of an incubating phase or something like that?
Correct. I mean, we sort of have these really long documents that describe what it means to write a good E to E test, what it means to write something that's very conformance-based, so it'll work across multiple clusters and multiple deployments across multiple cloud providers. And I think as we can improve the level of test coverage across all of those dimensions, that will then allow us to decide, give us enough confidence that the tests are worthy to gate on.
So can you present that proposal at a future meeting here in this forum?
Sure.
Because I think that would be something that would be necessary for all developers to understand, right? Everybody on the project, not just
Absolutely.
Back to what Quentin started with, that's an integral part of defining feature complete. We need shared understanding on what that means, and testing's a huge part of that. Okay, so moving into the actual timeline laid out for 1.3, again,
sorry, I had one other quick piece of feedback not related to testing, which was just that I noticed we called the release done, but then there's this additional period where we're still working on the docs. And the release has been cut, and we announced it loudly and proudly to the community, but there's all this other stuff that's not quite documented correctly. It's tough to find some of the new resources and whatnot. And as an end user, I think it would instill a lot more confidence if the docs were really locked up pretty solidly on new features, rather than saying we don't need to block on the docs.
Yeah, docs and tooling are first-class parts of a feature. Totally
I don't
agree.
think anybody disagrees with that. There were some significant logistical challenges this time that led to this suboptimal situation.
Yeah.
So
we all have to hold ourselves to a higher standard on that in the next release. I think that's all. Okay, for the timeline, so if we go into sort of 9 weeks of coding, then feature complete, 1 week of bug fixes and testing, then release the last alpha. So alphas, as a reminder, go out every 2 weeks as the project moves on. So we're sort of always cutting an alpha. 2 weeks of bug fix and test, declare beta, and then branch. And then 2 weeks of bug fixes, and then calling out DocWorks explicitly here. And releasing 1.3 final. Again, this is similar to what we've had in past milestones. The bug fix and test period probably seems about right, as long as we're on top of flaky tests. And then it'll be a matter of tuning our features list into that 8 to 9 weeks of coding and making sure we hit feature complete as defined. So just quickly, if you lay that out, I just literally laid this out by business week. March 21st, which is this week. So we're actually much of the way through this week already. I called that coding week 1. If you get down, that would be the end of coding would be May 20th as our goal. Roughly, 9 weeks, 2 months away. And then I actually called out a few times, check in on the status of all 1.3 features in the community meeting. I don't know what the right way to sort of get a feel for this is, but if one of our really key important 1.3 features is trending way behind, we need a way to catch that and either adjust the dates, add more people to work on it, do whatever it is we can to help get it back on track. So I'm sort of up for suggestions if the community meeting is the right place to occasionally check in on those handful of features.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That sounds awesome.
I think the check-in realistically will have to take place offline, and I think that we can report back at this community meeting that we've ascertained that these are the things that are in 1.3 and this is where they are progress-wise.
I would suggest finding a person that's a manager, a feature manager for that. Like actually, not one of the developers on it, but actually a feature manager.
To check up on all the features or on a per feature basis?
On a per feature basis, if there's a blocking feature, have a owner of maintaining the status of that and being that person reporting, not the developers reporting. Just have a.
Yeah, I think that's going to have to be a key part of our process, is that there has to be a person on the hook for every effort that rolls up to be a priority, right? You can't just be a diffuse responsibility.
We do have that. I mean, we have tech leads for each area, and we, somewhat slightly artificially assign every item to a tech lead.
Right, but somebody leading up a feature doesn't necessarily need to be the tech lead. Those can be separate roles for sure.
No, sure.
And there are also features that are led from externally in the community with Google input, but not Google lead.
Right. I guess I'm thinking through some of what I saw in OpenStack that was all PTL technical, like shepherding of these projects, and it ended up causing you're overloading people who are trying to get the code done. Mm-hmm. With management responsibilities. I actually think that this is a place where management is actually helpful and empowering to people, who aren't actually contributing to code to have a stake in getting it done. I was literally having a discussion about this in OpenStack context last night over dinner. and so it's interesting to come back.
Yeah, so I think basically one but on the line for each blocking feature is key. And I think that but may or may not necessarily be the developer. That definitely makes sense.
I would actually strongly at this point suggest it's not a developer. Get the product managers for the companies that have a stake in this involved in this, because it gives them something to do and it's concrete.
Okay. All right. So
and you want to know who those people are. I'll fully admit to having a second agenda on this. You want those people involved, and you want their names, and you want to know who they are. So you don't want the developers to proxy for the product managers. You want the opposite. And in OpenStack, one of the big fail points was that we had a lot of hidden product managers, and this would expose them.
Well, not every company is going to have sort of a strict product manager role, right? I think there's going to be smaller shops where you're going to have people playing multiple hats. So, yeah,
Totally right. And those, and if they have the resources, then they can provide this role. And if not, it's a bigger company doing it. I'm not saying it's only one company organizing only their people. I'm saying this is a management role in the community for somebody who's not coding. So they have the objectivity to talk to multiple people and say, here's what's going on. Yes, you're on track. No, you're not. They can hear it. Where the technical people bring a bias into those conversations that doesn't give us, it's just the wrong involvement. I mean, I code. I get way too deep into it, and I have trouble tracking a delivery when I'm doing that. When I'm in a management mode and I'm not coding, it's a whole different way of working.
I don't totally disagree with you. I guess one point I can offer is that an alternative approach is to make it a much more objective thing, or have a significant objective measurement of these things. So, are the tests written and passing? Is the design doc submitted and approved and merged? Is the code complete or not? And you don't really need a product manager to make those kind of assumptions or judgment calls. By all means, if all of those things are in, somebody can step in and say, but we still know it's not done. On the flip side, if it doesn't matter who stands up and says this thing's complete, if the tests are not checked in, and the design doc is not committed and reviewed, then clearly it's not done.
I strongly agree with you on having objective criteria. I'm trying to capture the human element of get the people who are there anyway exposed and involved, doing the job they should do.
So we definitely want more people involved, more transparency on this, and then to have these explicit checkbacks on the features as we get through the coding part of the milestone. So May 20th, assuming we hit that and all of our great features are done and working perfectly, that would look like bug fix week 1 here. And then a reminder, I think May 30th is Memorial Day in the US. That's a US holiday. There aren't a whole lot of other holidays on this schedule. And then we get into our, sort of 4 weeks cutting alpha, cutting beta, and releasing June 24th would be the Friday of that week if we're on track. And then there's one more week after that, which would still fall in Q2 for anyone that actually cares about quarter boundaries, but that's about where we'd be. And then sort of the last note here is this is a totally not finished section, but I do want to denote all the features going in with one clear query. Like there should be one GitHub syntax query where I can find all 1.3 features. And so what I'm proposing here, which I think a lot of people have agreed with offline, so this is probably not controversial, is be better about using the milestone, tag everything as v1.3. And for the handful, 5, maybe 10 really key high-level features, tag them feature blocking label. And then for other features, there might be 50 of these. Again, tag them with v1.3 and the feature label. So the very quick check is how many feature blocking things are closed and done, and how many other features that we're trying to get in are closed and done.
TJ, one comment on that is, at first glance, feature blocking and feature look kind of like what we use priorities for at the moment. And we should just make people understand the distinction.
Yeah, why are we not using priorities?
Because
I think I know the answer actually, but I was just putting it out there.
A P0 bug in v1.3 could be a flaky test, or it could be pet set. And those are different things.
Well, so that's the justification for a feature versus bug label, which we have.
Well, we have kind bug and kind feature.
Yes.
Okay. So then maybe the right thing is to use kind feature for both of these and use P0 for the blockers. That's what you guys are saying?
P0, P1 was our definition of blocking.
Makes sense.
That gets the same distinction for sure. We can do that.
Thank you.
So that's it for this. I guess feedback on overall schedule, like if this is too aggressive or feels right, or if we, I guess we can cut features to make the schedule or extend the schedule to include features. We kind of own that designation. But if we want to stay on the roughly early, this is probably what it looks like.
So the only point that I would make on the schedule is if we slip a week, we are running right up into the 4th of July for any sort of release press release, community engagement, noise, support, things like that. So I would say if we slip from the week of June 20th, we're looking at after the 4th of July. Because if you slip into that next week, you're right up against it.
Yeah.
I would actually suggest we carve 1 week off this schedule, shift it all, make your 9-week feature coding 8 weeks and slide everything back a week, and then we have a week of slippage available.
So are we commensurately limiting the features?
We'll have to.
The thing that I'm struggling with is that the feedback from last release was that it took 9 weeks. So you're basically stuffing it back in the box and saying we're going to let it. We're just going to acknowledge it.
So here's the thing, Sarah. Last time was December also.
So this document is how big the bag is. We don't know how much stuff we're trying to put in the bag, right? So whether we need to limit features or not, who knows, right? I mean, we really don't. I mean, the best we can do is prioritize, set some goals, and hope that things land. If we move to a more, a real release cadence, then it's going to be much easier to say, sorry, this thing didn't make it this time. Let's make it, make sure it's really solid and hits next time. Like that's the only way if we're going to start hitting date-driven release.
And I've heard a lot of people advocate for that. Like that's kind of why we're trying to make a distinction between blockers and everything else. Like if your feature's in the everything else bucket, like come week 8 or 9, if you're not in, you're not in.
But here's the thing, is anything a blocker? Like short of the product not working, is anything a blocker?
In the past, that has been true.
It doesn't offer major improvements over 1.2, right? Like
it causes people churn to upgrade their clusters to some degree, right?
Okay.
So
if we fast forward 8 weeks and we really have nothing to show for it from the end user point of view, then it's not worth doing a release. Is that kind of
that is the feeling? Yes.
All right, let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
So if we can get to the point where we are able to upgrade clusters non-disruptively, then it would be much nicer to have like a 3-week or 4-week release cadence, right? Because then we could just stream the releases out and everybody could stay up to date.
Because I feel like the 3 or 4 month release cadence is too long to sort of have it be like, oh, I'll just wait for next time. But too short to actually do all the work that everybody wants to get in. It's kind of in this no man's land, which is kind of unfortunate.
I agree.
One of the detractors from a release cadence that's every 3 to 4 weeks is there's going to be a lot of hesitancy for people to actually take and upgrade that in a production environment. I mean, I don't mean to point issues towards the amount of testing that goes on, but just that level of cadence of actually picking it up and using it is the other thing you need to ask a question about, is whether or not what the appetite for that is.
I mean, we could do something like Ubuntu where you have essentially, minor and LTS releases. I don't know what the non-LTS version is, right? With the idea that there'll be, for people who are reticent to upgrade, it's like, this is the release that, bundles a bunch of stuff. And like maybe we do that every 6 months, right? But then there's more frequent releases with features for people who want to live on the bleeding edge. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's worth talking about. I don't know if we have to decide now, but
it's definitely what we're talking about. It changes how we deal with various API compatibility issues, and so we can't just. It's going to require work to be able to do that. I agree. It seems attractive, but a bunch of stuff needs to be rethought about how we do upgrades and upgrade testing.
Joe, another comment about it's too short to get everything done. I think we need to get out of the mindset of starting something at the end of release X and finishing it at the beginning of release X+1. It's totally reasonable to spend 6 months building something and you just don't release it in the next release, but the one after it. And I think we need to get comfortable with that.
Yeah, and especially as we get and hopefully I hope that we're going to get a little bit more rigorous about design docs and actually vetting out the features before they go in. I mean, that's just going to take time to do that process, and getting that and coding and testing and documentation and, from conception to GA in 4 months is going to be difficult.
No, it's completely impractical in the case, and it also it makes it very difficult to build big things, which is often the most important things, is the big things.
I don't know. I like building small things that turn into big things, but that's a philosophy too.
Even those, yeah.
So I have a quick question on the upgrade testing thing. I believe that the whole reason SIG testing got started in the first place was because we were experiencing a lot of pain, specifically on vetting whether Kubernetes was good enough to deploy to GKE. And Ike McCreary did a lot of work on really breaking up the tests to actually automatically roll a cluster forward and verify backwards compatibility and all of that. And I've actually heard no feedback about whether or not that improved things, short of the discussion last week where it seems like the official designation is once the stable file is changed, that's going to be our determination that things are good enough. GKE will roll at some point, but we don't really care whether or not that's going to validate the stability of Kubernetes. So what I took from that was it sounded like folks internally are confident enough that GKE will just seamlessly upgrade. Is that the case? Is there some level of improved confidence in upgrade testing, or is Brian sort of saying that people internally are still having a real tough time being confident in upgrades?
I think we had a couple of particular challenges. One is the way we were testing. I mean, we continuously test upgrade from 1.1, whatever the last 1.1 patch release was, to head or to the latest alpha. That because that didn't enable certain alpha features in the 1.1 release, it didn't uncover problems that users who did that would hit when upgrading for real. So users who had, so one issue is we should have tests for that, so we should at least be aware. And we, this comes back to getting the documentation out ahead of the release as well. But, some of these issues or how users would perceive the issue would have been uncovered earlier if we had actual user feedback. As far as the automated testing, we were somewhat slow to get actual testing on the release branch up, including the upgrade testing, and then there were a bunch of sort of annoying standard problems we have getting these things to work, getting all the quotas in place and everything like that. So, I think around the time we wanted to cut the release, we still didn't have quite all of the tests up on the release branch as we would have liked. So we, to some degree, relied on the tests passing on head, since we were still relatively close to head, especially for the first couple of beta releases. As far as the improvements made from before, I'm not really sure. Ike would be the best person to be able to answer that, but it still wasn't as smooth as we needed to be, I would say.
But that's different from what existed between 1.0 and 1.1, which was that there was a different set of tests that ran to make it GKE approved, correct? Which is no longer the case.
Can I chime in here? There is the particularly live upgrade issue. Actually, it is because we made some wrong assumption, and because GKE don't do the real live upgrade, so we don't hit that problem. And and also GCE test when we run those tests. So we always think about our customer to doing upgrade of the things, certain upgrade of the things. They are going to drain the node and upgrade. So that's assumption. It is we made in the 1.1 release and didn't have any problem. So for 1.2, we didn't really change any decision. So but the customer actually using a different way. So we didn't capture that difference. And in the open source community customer, some of those customers, and that difference between the GCE and the GKE customer, that's one of those problems cause the life upgrades. Yeah.
So it sounds like there's further testing coverage that we have to sort out for that.
Well,
Tom?
it's not even just testing, it's how the system is designed to deal with it. Right now, we don't really have adequate support for doing the kinds of upgrades that people were actually doing in the wild. And we don't strongly enough recommend that people not do it the way they're doing it, I guess. So we have to decide if that method is going to be explicitly supported and add whatever support is necessary and then actually test it if we decide to support that.
Okay.
Which is definitely one of the big roadmap items for SIG testing for 1.3. We are looking at how to try and better describe upgrades and deployments in a little more modular fashion so that customers who deploy their Kubernetes clusters in a different manner than what kubeup or e2e.go do can still have some level of automated coverage on their particular snowflake of a deployment.
Fantastic. So we've got just a few minutes left, and I bumped Quentin last week. So can we give Quentin the last 8 minutes to do a Kubernetes update, and then we can do a broader SIG testing update next week? That work for you, Aaron?
Yes.
So if just on the SIG testing briefly, if it's going to be more than an update, if it's going to be a proposal or an announcement of a change to developer workflow, can we advertise it as such?
Ahead of time. Yeah.
We definitely can. I don't think it's really going to be that. In fact, I'd really encourage the sorts of folks who need to be involved in discussions that are going to block development to attend the next SIG testing meeting so we can start to hash this sort of stuff out. I think a lot of people are assuming that testing is going to solve some problems, and I just want to better understand what the expectations are and who all the stakeholders are.
So look for something that might look more like a proposal in a few weeks after another couple of rounds.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to ask you to wait to make one thing that should be obvious, but when is your meeting? Just so everybody knows without excuses.
Sure. So it's weekly on Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Or 5 p.m. UTC if you hate time zones.
Except that this is not the 2-week period to hate time zones and try to do anything in UTC compared to the US. So, Quentin.
Hello. Yes, I'm not sure that I'll need all 8 minutes because I completely forgot that I signed up to do this update, but I will wing it.
You've got 7 now. Go.
Okay, so in brief summary, Kubernetes is the Cluster Federation project. For those who don't know, the grand plan is to be able to federate multiple Kubernetes clusters together in a controlled fashion so that you can do useful things like migrate applications between clusters, spread them across multiple clusters, where cluster in this case might be Kubernetes installation on a different cloud provider. So you could migrate from a cluster in AWS to a cluster in GCE, for example, or vice versa, on-premise to cloud, cloud to on-premise, etc. So there are a whole bunch of use cases that are interesting. Where we are today is that we released what was called multi-zone clusters, nicknamed Kubernetes Lite in version 1.2. So that enables you to build a cluster across multiple availability zones within the same cloud provider. That is explicitly automated and tested on GCE and AWS, and it enables you to do things like target all of your instances of a given replication controller or service, for example, to one availability zone, or to spread it across as many availability zones as you have in your cluster. Primary goal of all of this is application fault tolerance. So if you want to be resilient to a zone outage, you can now fairly trivially do that. It involves no changes to the Kubernetes API. So if you deploy your application into a multi-zone cluster and you do nothing else and your configuration files stay exactly the same as they were before, you magically get a high availability application at for no effort on your part, at the potential cost of a small amount of additional network bandwidth charge. In parallel, we're working on what is internally nicknamed Kubernetes proper, which is a completely separate control plane, which looks architecturally quite similar to the control plane of Kubernetes. For example, it has a persistent store in the form of, by default, etcd. It has a scheduler, it has an API server, it has all of the familiar things that you have come to know and love in Kubernetes, but it sits above multiple clusters. There are detailed designs in place for what that thing looks like, what federated replication controllers look like, what federated services look like. So how, for example, you could deploy your application across multiple clusters in different cloud providers and have traffic load balanced across them, have them fail over between clusters and cloud providers, etc. We have an implementation of the sort of first phase of that control plane. We have some testing in place, so I think the unit tests are pretty much passing at the moment, give or take a few small things. The code is still in review. It's not merged into the main repo yet. We also have a detailed design and a work in progress, almost complete implementation of a basic scheduler. And we are hoping to release some of this stuff in 1.3. In parallel with this work, we are also aiming to provide a simpler version of this for customers who want it firstly sooner and perhaps don't need some of the fancy features. So that would involve expanding our user interface to be able to manage multiple clusters. Right now, the UI backend runs in a single Kubernetes cluster and enables you to see and manage that cluster. The idea would be to make it easy to have that thing aware of multiple clusters and allow you to flip between them. And similar work with kubectl, which currently is not that easy to have it work across different clusters. There is some existing stuff there on profiles and API endpoints, etc. But we need to just tie that together into something a little more friendly. And in that scenario, you will be able to control multiple clusters either with kubectl or with the UI. And I fit it into my time limit.
You did. You have time for maybe even one question before all the rooms get, we play musical rooms.
So yeah, fire away if anyone has any questions.
Then let me do this. How can the community help you? What do you need help with in the last minute?
You can take Kubernetes Lite, which is in 1.2, out for a spin and test it out and hopefully tell us that it works fantastically, or else tell us some things that we should do better. And you can read the bi-weekly working group meeting notes. We try and keep that group reasonably small, not because we don't like people's input, but just because it makes it easier to move forward. But definitely, if offline, you could go through the meeting notes there if you're interested in this area and tell us if we have forgotten something or made some silly decisions that you disagree with. We are very open to those kinds of things.
Fantastic. Thank you for the update, and thank you all, as always, for joining. I thought this was going to be short because the agenda was light, but we had some really interesting discussions. So no introductions for the rest of you who are new, but welcome. And I hope to see you all next week. Thanks.
Quentin, I just wanted to say real quick, I really appreciate the fact that you guys are doing a more incremental approach to Kubernetes, just sort of in total, versus trying to sort of, hit it out of the park the first time. I think that pragmatic approach, serves customers and the product really well. So
thank you.
Fantastic.
Comes with the gray hair and the beard.
All right. See you guys next week.
All right. Ciao.